Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. I'm going to try something a little bit different in this scene. I often work with white pigment ink on darker types of cardstocks or foils to create these kind of freeform looking clouds, real kind of soft and billowy. But I thought I don't know if I've really tried them on toned white paper backgrounds. Okay, so a lot of times I'll add a series of values of whatever given colors I'm trying to depict, be it blue tones for maybe a cool, I don't know, sky or winter scene or something like that, or sunset colors. But I don't think I've done that and done these free-form clouds before. Usually I'm defining clouds through the use of negative space, meaning I'm retaining some of the white of the paper. I'm not quite sure if I've added tone down in this kind of free-form application of it and then gone back with the paper towel kind of masked free-form clouds added back into it. But I thought I would try it in here. And I was probably being a little bit too conservative. I probably should have gone darker in the background. But one of the other things that I wanted to do on this scene was my general thoughts as far as a layout went was that I was going to have a moon and then a quote stamp to go along with it and a couple of the newer pine kind of evergreen bows coming into the piece. But that's all that I had in mind. You know, the biggest thing was the white pigment ink clouds to be added in afterwards. So here I am. I'm adding in, oh, let's see, I think that was two different values of blue so far. Now the first color, when you're doing that amount of coverage and using that amount of ink, one of the things that I did was I just added some re-inker fluid to a paper towel. Okay, so you put a few drops on that paper towel and you have a lot of moisture built up in that, you know, kind of wadded up paper towel. And it just makes it so much easier to blend your colors rather than having kind of a real sparse amount of ink on a paper towel coming right off of a pad. Okay, so with a pad, you can get a certain amount of ink infusion in that paper towel, but when you just use that re-inker, it just makes it go so much faster. So you don't have to do it for every color, but I'd often recommend if you're doing a lot of color in this fashion or any type of form of sponging colors onto a piece of cardstock, a re-inker is a really good way to go. And what it does is it not only colors, but one of the things that doesn't occur to those that haven't done this method is they're thinking about coloring, okay? But what I'm doing with that first color when I do this type of process right here is I'm coloring, but I'm also kind of saturating the paper, the surface, and some of the pulp of the paper too. And what that does is it makes the latter colors that I add in here, the medium tones, the darker tones, easier to spread around because of that saturated pulp of the paper. So you want to have some of that moisture soak into the paper so that you're not kind of applying wet, darker inks onto a somewhat drier surface, okay? Even when you're adding inks out of a pad, it kind of, you know, they dry just about as fast as you can add them. Yeah, it depends on what where you're at, the relative humidity, and so on and so forth. But I don't know, just make life easy for yourself and use a re-inker if you have them, okay? Okay, so ripped paper towel here. And what I'm doing is I'm adding in these clouds here. The clouds really aren't terribly well defined right here. And it's because I'm adding white onto a pretty light background. So this is where I was thinking maybe I should have gone darker with that background. I was kind of approaching it like I normally do when I don't add clouds back into it, but I really should have gone darker to compensate for that and so that these clouds show up more. But I'll show you what I do here in a minute to kind of remedy this lack of cloud definition in here. And what I'm going to do is I'll use the other part of that ripped paper towel, and you'll see how I do that. Okay, so these clouds above the moon, I'm making them bottom lit. So I've flipped my paper towel around so that these clouds above the moon, which is the source of light, are being bottom lit. Okay? It's not really that apparent here because, again, of that lack of contrast, but we'll bring out these cloud structures much more when we add some darker tones, and I do that kind of reverse, I don't know, I guess you'd call it cloud definition process, okay? All right, so see that? There's where my ripped paper towel is. So I'm covering up the cloud now, and we're going to go back in. I'll just use that same paper towel that I did that background blue, color additions with. And I'll just use this part of the paper towel to better define that cloud right there, or all the clouds, okay? All right, so see we get the better kind of a rendition, edge, whatever you call it, of that cloud now, okay? Now it's important to kind of blend it in now. Don't go too heavy-handed in it. Kind of spread your colors around, tap lightly at first, and then add more. And then see how I'm kind of moving my hand around. I'm adding it around that paper towel, but then I'm adding it upwards like that, okay? Here's the cloud going downward here, you know, the bottom lit cloud, and we're going right across into that. And again, the scene is fairly moist now with both of that dye-based ink coverage plus the wet pigment ink. So that blue went on there pretty easily. Okay, now what I'm doing is, sometimes when I do these ripped paper towels, even though it's a very soft edge, it still gives me kind of a hard fixed line. So what you do is you freehand in some additional white going above that template line. You can call that, you know, that paper towel template that you're working with, and then you go below it. So you're like kind of diffusing that edge a little bit with additional, in this case, translucent white ink, okay? As much as I'd want some of these pigment inks to be nice and opaque, they're really more translucent, especially if you're adding just a small amount of it. The colors underneath it are always going to show through, which makes it good for this in some ways, you know, because you get a nice soft edge to, I don't know, I guess the structures that you're creating. And, you know, those clouds do have a structure to them, even though they represent just illuminated moisture in the air. Okay, but see how that's coming around? It's a really nice, soft, kind of glowing look right there. And that should contrast against these evergreen bows that we stamp in here, too. All right, so I'm deciding right here, what ink do I want to go with? I can go with the Brilliance Black. I can go with the dye-based ink too, but I just think that over the top of that white pigment ink, it's best to go with the darkest ink that we can possibly use. And for those of you that have it, the VersaFine Clair probably represents one of the darker, thicker styles of ink that we could possibly use in here. All right, so I was thinking about the bow, but I was thinking, well, I want to go with that quote. So why don't we add a quote in here first, because it's easier to kind of work around an existing quote than to stamp the bows in there and have to pick out some kind of a quote that will fit in the remaining space. So let's stamp this. Anytime you stamp a word stamp, it ends up being a pretty significant focal point. So let's get that stamped in there first and work our other imagery around that. All right, so that one goes in like so. And then it's easy to bring those bows. I put that quote stamp a little bit over the top of that moon. If you have something really dark right over the moon or right next to it, by contrast, it makes that moon seem a little bit lighter by having something nice and dark next to it. Now, I mean, that bow is, it's a decent ways away, but that bow also achieved the it achieved making expanding the value range of the piece. Okay, the white didn't get whiter, but it just looks whiter by having something darker next to it. So what we're doing is perception is kind of by contrast, right? So if you have something dark next to something lighter, it just makes that lighter thing seem even lighter by contrast. All right, so see how I have that branch going right into the moon? I'm kind of obscuring the moon. I mean, it was never terribly, defined to begin with. Again, because I didn't want that moon to be too heavy in contrast because that quote stamp wouldn't stand out against it, okay? So that's why I stamped it out fairly light. Okay, so there's our two bows in there. Now I have that lower corner area, and I was looking at that and I thought that would be the perfect place for some birds. All right, so I went and got my birds here. I have these other ones that I thought would go really good in there, but I thought I haven't used this migration here in a while. Okay, now I just stamped it out to look at what it would look like in its second impression, and it looks light. Okay, if you stamp it out in its first fully inked impression, it'll stamp out black, right? But if you remove some of the ink, it'll be some version of gray probably, unless you didn't take off enough ink. So I stamped that migration out in probably what came out to about an 80% gray because I blotted it out first. Now I'm taking these ducks right here and stamping them out in full black. And what this achieves, is the lighter migration. They look farther back in the distance because of that value, okay? Lighter things tend to look farther away. So we've created a little bit of depth in there with the use of value, okay? All right, now I'm looking at this, and that VersaFine Clair, it's a very thick oil-based ink. So I need to dry this off before I do the next step, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to sandwich a lot of this imagery in some additional white pigment ink, okay? So we have this white pigment ink that's already laid down as kind of a foundation for these images. We stamp out the images, and then we apply some more white pigment ink over the top of it. So it's kind of like a glowing mist sandwich or something like that. You're sandwiching the images in between this substance that represents illuminated light or reflected light, okay? So that being said, I mean, to do that, I really needed to dry off some of that Clair. And being that I'm working in this more of a matte style of cardstock here, this one's the silk coated paper, which has a little bit of a coating on it. That's probably why it took a little bit longer to dry than normal, but that Clair, I mean, heat setting it took care of that. So I'm just kind of pointing out right here the things that I might want to cover with a little bit of the white pigment ink to vary the image darkness in terms of value, the crispness in terms of the texture, and by depth, okay? So you'll see what this does in here, and just how do you approach this addition of tone, okay? Now there's not a real hard set formula or something like that. Okay, now first of all, I wanted to format this into a card. I thought I would do that before I started adding in that white pigment ink. Being that the card was nice and dry, let's format this. So I have a little bit of a border of white, then I have that blue border. I don't know, I chose those colors because I have a lot of that, those two different types of paper here. And you'll see where this, well, you saw it in the introduction for this video, what I do on the interior of this card, but You know, that black really opened up a lot of opportunities for, I don't know, kind of additional interest on the interior of the card. Okay, now, some of that black was still a little bit wet, so I'm just hitting it again here with the heat gun. Okay, so here's the most important thing when doing this type of thing, and it's the thing that, I don't know, none of us really are used to doing if you haven't done it before. Okay, now it's applying some ink, white ink, on a cotton ball, okay? Now the biggest thing is that you don't have too much ink on this cotton ball. See that? I mean, I'm adding it down there, but it's not some big slathering of white ink. And it's almost pigment ink, it's almost like white paint. So I'm applying a very dry version of this ink, so I've removed a lot of the ink. Well, actually, my pad is very, very dry, so it's not applying very much at all. But you see that in there, where there's that variation in value over those ducts in formation? They look, you know, kind of farther away and closer depending on how dark they are, relatively dark, okay? So the lighter ones look farther away. So you've created a lot of depth in a very kind of detailed area. Now let's do the same thing, but just on a branch right here, okay? Now see, that moon is right around in that area where I'm adding this, okay? So I'm adding this pigment ink where the lighter area is on that branch, okay? So the branch closer to the light, I'm adding that pigment ink over some of that branch, over the needles. So now, instead of just this one flat branch, I'm just showing you how something, you know, has different shades right there on that piece of paper. But see right in there? I mean, some of that stamped out a little bit lighter because I was stamping it over some white pigment ink, but I'm going back in over this bow here. Sorry, I'm doing it off screen here. But I'm adding that over some of that bow, and it gives the bows, which were just stamped in straight black, a much more three-dimensional feel because you're seeing that light is hitting it in a different way. So see how I just put it right on that tip there? And look how it illuminates it in a very soft light. So from a textural standpoint, having kind of a soft light is no small feature, even though it could be a small feature in area, but the impact is so much more in terms of extending the textural range of your entire card, okay? Now I'm going in here and adding a little bit of a extra touch up to some of those clouds in there. Putting a little bit more over that bow right there. Look at that bow capturing that light. All right. So see, I really like that look. We used to call that turning an object in space when you're doing something on a two-dimensional surface, but you're giving it the illusion of three-dimensional space, okay? And by changing a flat object like that, with a little bit of value changes, really does a lot. Okay, now this is something that's also changing the depth of a piece. It's putting these little highlights onto these needles, the branches, etc. Okay. And one of the things that's occurred to me is that these bows are the perfect size for these highlights. I do highlights on everything. I do it on a background mountain that represents, you know, something that could be 30 miles away, I don't know, 20 miles away or something like that. Little dots, but those dots on these branches look like they're to scale with these bows, and I think they really make those bows nice and sparkly. Really stands out like that, but this is looking at it kind of at arm's distance. But look at the three-dimensional look to what was an otherwise just, you know, mono value thing. Now I'm just showing you how little sparkles, you know, little specular light is on everything, you know, just around us. All that light is reflecting off of all those pens and pencils in that jar. The same thing happens on objects like that, okay? It's one of those smaller details, but it's a detail that really can make a pretty big impact in terms of the overall feel of your, I don't know, end result. Okay, so I'm just cutting off some excess card here. Okay, that was a full page, 8.5 by 11, just folded in half, and I just cut off that little bit of extra there. Okay, so that is the card there. Now, it wasn't occurring to me to do anything on the inside, but I thought, let's do it. I wanted this card to be more of a quick card type of video for you guys, but I don't know. It's one of those things that there was additional opportunities that came up. Okay, now I'm cleaning off these birds because I was originally thinking about just stamping them in white on the interior for a little bit of visual continuity between the front of the card and the interior of the card, okay? But I thought, let's put some clouds right in here, you know? I was talking about how I usually just add these types of cloud formations to darker cardstocks or darker foils or something like that. I thought, why don't we do that here on the interior of this card, and I'll do it in the corner here. And that brings some of those forms, some of that look and texture from the outside to the inside. It looks different because the inside is all black, and I did this on over, you know, variations of blue on the outside. But again, it's the same type of thing. So you want to carry out whatever it might be from one area of a piece to another, okay? That's one of those things that designers do. You carry out whatever. It could be shapes, colors, textures, something in a theme, objects of a similar type of thing, you know. It could be anything, all right? So in this case, clouds were, you know, a pretty good opportunity, and I can just do a small amount of them, okay? So I've added that down using the paper towel template. And then again, just like on the outside, the front of the card, I'm softening those cloud edges where they've been defined by the template, okay? So you go above and below it, and then you get more of a softer kind of glowing look to your cloud. I think the clouds look like they're moving a little bit more when you do this freehand application back over your template style of application, your template methodology, okay? And you can adjust it too. See, I'm kind of adding a little bit more pigment ink in some areas, making some areas of the cloud glow a little bit more, so that it doesn't look so monotonous and uniform from one billow to the next. And I think that makes it look, I don't know, a little bit more interesting and varied. Okay, so there we have some clouds right there. And, okay, so I'm thinking to myself, all right, what can we do to bring some additional continuity from the front of the card to the interior, okay? When you do these different things, I call it like a needle and thread that ties different areas of card together, or in this case, different areas of a folded card together. The more continuity, the more, I don't know, kind of a harmony you bring to an overall project like that. So here's the bows going in there. After I did these, I thought, you know, I probably could have stamped them in white too, and that would have been cool. But there's the bows kind of reversed out in there. It almost looks like just the black of the paper, you know, stamping them right over that white like that. So it's kind of a reverse impression in some ways. All right, so I'm thinking about adding in some little stars into that scene, but I just couldn't stand it and had to go with what occurred to me later. I don't think it's occurred to me yet because I was about to add in some white stars into the card, but I thought, oh, let's just go for the Dr. Martens Bleed Proof White, and let's make a much, much bigger statement, okay? Just with a much more, I don't know, kind of expanded idea of a starry interior. Okay, so I'm trying to think of let's see, let's splatter this down. Then I thought, let's go for kind of a Milky Way here. So the way you go for a Milky Way is you just kind of do it in a little bit of a band, you know, kind of make it a little bit of an S curve to make it a little bit more, I don't know, kind of graceful. So there you have it right there. There's your Milky Way, okay? But we can do a couple other things to it, you know, just for a little bit of variation and whatnot. That Dr. Martin's bleed proof white dries pretty fast, but you see some of those larger splatters in there. Those ones take a little bit more time to dry, so I heat set that because I didn't want to close the card and have those thicker little specks of paint print, you know, on the opposing side of the closed card. Okay, so here's some of this white pigment ink again, okay? So this is going to bring some of that soft type of texture into the star, the band of stars, the Milky Way, okay? So what I'm doing is I don't have a big blob of paint on there. As a matter of fact, look how dry it is. It almost doesn't show up at all. So I re-inked it, okay? Going and adding it in. Add kind of a different amount to some of your stars. So some of them are glowing brighter, some of them are glowing darker, okay? And you get a lot of more a variation that way. Some stars are younger, some stars are closer to you, and that's where you get that variety like that. Okay, so you see that? We get that soft kind of glowing light. On the front of the card, we have a glowing, real soft light moon. But then on the interior, we have these soft glowing light stars like that. Okay, now I have these blue paint pens here, acrylic paint pens from the Artistro set. And since I have different values of different colors, why not bring an additional needle and thread element from the front of the card to the interior? So we take some of that blue from the front of the card and add these blue stars into there like that. And that will create that visual harmony for the viewer of your card. When they open it up, you know, they're seeing this blue tinge front, and then they can open it up right here and have some of that additional hue on the interior. All right, so that should do it right there. Just some final little touches, and that's your card. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks as always for tuning into the Stampscapes channel.